are Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you real quick to everyone out there for making the show your very first listen, and a reminder that you can find Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Go and subscribe to the channel, or you can also follow along 100% for free where you may be listening to your podcast. I think that's a pretty good deal. Make sure to go and do that real quick, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. I also wanted to let you know real quick that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now to get the cheapest tickets for all of the sports, music, and theater events near you. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Joining me today for a nice little off-season conversation is none other than WGN's Joe Brand, who you may recognize from a multitude of different spots. He's all over the place, from his Blackhawks stuff, pregame, postgame, during intermission, also the voice of the Kane County Cougars. Quite the talented individual that I'm very fortunate and blessed to have back on the show here today. Joe, my brother, how you doing? How's the off-season, quote unquote? I know it's not much of an off-season for you, but how's everything treating you here as of late?
Well, Jack, first off, thank you very much for the intro. I think I want to clip that on my own and use that. Very complimentary. Yeah, it's funny because we'll play other teams, and when their broadcaster comes in, they're like, "Hey, how was your off season?" I'm like, "Well, which one is the off season now? Doing baseball this summer." But no, lucky to have both gigs and just try to enjoy it as much as I can. Little crazy, but during the summer it's a lot lighter because I don't travel with the Cougars, so I do get a breather when they go on the road. And I am at the ballpark today, taking on the Lake Country Dockhounds, but always a fun time to be at Northwestern Medicine Field. If anyone's thinking about checking out a minor league baseball game, please, kccougars.com, check it out.
I actually have some pretty good young memories of me going to Kane County Cougars games. I believe I saw Aramis Ramirez back in the day on a conditioning stint down there or something. But I have a lot of good memories as a young kid going and running the bases after the game for Kane County Cougars stuff. So pretty awesome that you're doing that. How's baseball stuff been going this summer? I mean, this is when baseball, hockey's in its final, of course, but it's when baseball season's at its finest. How's that been going for you?
Yeah, it's been great. It's funny. I feel like everyone's got a story of having their birthday party here in Kane County and dancing on top of the dugout. So, and I think I know of the Aramis Ramirez rehab game that you're talking about because they still talk about it here. I think we had like 13,000 people in this ballpark for 4th of July weekend, and it was something along the lines of Ramirez and Carlos Zambrano both rehabbing for the Peoria Chiefs, playing the Cougars. But it's a feel-good place, and it's a little different now. We're not affiliated anymore, so we're in the American Association, but a ton of great competitive baseball. And this is the time when the place starts to get packed. And when the weather's nice, it's a really tough place to beat. So really looking forward to this weekend of games against the Lake Country Dockhounds. Weather's supposed to be perfect once again. So they're playing a little bit better. We were off to a little bit of a slow start, but took care of some business on the road and hopefully continuing that success here at home now.
Absolutely. Glad to hear that. Some good weather here lately as well. Not too hot, not too cold. Feels like we're getting into that summer feel, as I mentioned, when baseball kind of takes things over. But I mentioned you're here on the show to have an off-season conversation. I reference it's not much of an off-season for you. And it honestly doesn't feel like the off-season. I mean, it does, but in a sense, there's a buzz around the Chicago Blackhawks right now, Joe. And that's obviously because they won the 2023 NHL draft lottery and will be selecting Connor Bedard with the first overall pick here in less than 3 weeks in Nashville, Tennessee. There's an energy around the Blackhawks right now, and more so than I've seen in quite a while for a team that, hasn't played a game in 2 months. So, figure we got to start there with Chicago being so excited to have Connor Bedard be calling this city their home here in not too long. But yeah, it's just been a whirlwind for the Blackhawks these last few months. From the end of the season there, where the Blackhawks go and they beat the Penguins in one of their final games of the season. They take the Philadelphia Flyers to overtime, and it's like, what are we doing here? And it takes them out of the chances to win the best odds to win the draft lottery. And then, of course, things still wind up working in their favor. They jump Columbus and Anaheim to get that number 1 overall pick. I guess my first question for you is, did you expect the Blackhawks to win the draft lottery? Because I honestly didn't. I had kind of just come to a place where I had accepted that they were going to be in a good spot regardless. They were guaranteed a top 5 pick. It was going to help out their rebuild, but I just really didn't think that they were actually going to win it. So I guess, yeah, that's my first question to you. And what was your reaction to the Blackhawks getting that number 1 overall pick? Because I lost my marbles and went running into my backyard like I was 12 years old again.
The day of the lottery, I think I convinced myself to thinking they were going to get 2. They were going to get number 2. And obviously that's a great landing spot. How about the fact that, Taves nearly had the game winner in that final game of the season. And I had a buddy that went to the game, and he's like, I had my camera ready on Snapchat to record that game winning goal. And if he would have had that, now if he would have had it, the Hawks aren't in this position. Obviously, it just changes everything right away. And even Kyle Davidson wasn't trying to get his hopes up. Now, everything that he and his staff have been doing leading up to this point was to cushion themselves in case this didn't happen. They just wanted to stock up as many draft picks as they possibly could, really solidify their farm system. And now that's starting to get a lot more of a higher ranking based on the last couple of drafts and how they're developing players. It changes so much, and it changes so much immediately. I know a lot of teams are frustrated because it is the Blackhawks, and all the rumors, or I shouldn't even say rumors, the speculation that it was fixed. But I mean, what else can the NHL do other than show how the lottery balls got filed out in real time and then put that on the internet? I was at the United Center for the lottery, not where all those viral videos went, Voster's jumping up and down in the front row. I was with the rest of the media over at Queenie's. So we're watching this on the NHL network, or on ESPN rather, and I'm following along on Twitter. And the picks are coming out about 10, 15 seconds before on TV. And I'm not a fan of this because I see it first, I read it first, and it's so anticlimactic that way. And then it goes on TV, and it's just going in order of exactly how these teams finished. And I even made the joke, I'm like, why even have a lottery if this is the way it's going to be? And I didn't hear the leak from Kevin Weeks talking about Columbus. The guy I'm with mentioned it, and I'm like, I didn't hear that. And I look on Twitter, and Twitter's going ballistic. Why did they say Columbus? Why did they say Columbus at 3? And they come back from commercial. Now I'm glued to Twitter because I want to know what is what for real. You see Columbus, and then the next thing I see is the Blackhawks. And I'm on the media side, so the tension, or I should say the environment is reserved and neutral, and it pops up and everyone just goes, wow, wow. And then you hear the loud roar from the other room. Obviously surprising, obviously very, very cool. It's so big, and I don't even want to put the spin on putting pressure and all this stuff on this Connor Bedard kid, because even if none of this works out, and I hate to even go down that road, but let's play that terrible hypothetical.
I mean, love it. That's what we do in June.
Yeah, right. Even before they officially draft him, but it's like, what else are they supposed to do? I mean, of course they're going to go after this generational talent. Of course they're going to go after this kid that people have been talking about since he's been 15 years old. They've been foolish not to do that. So I don't even go down too far the rabbit hole of, is this too much speculation on it? Obviously, you got to take it one step at a time. But Kyle Davidson has done such a good job of that with the rest of this system. He's taken his time with every single prospect. He's trying to make sure that he's not rushing these guys up to the NHL level. He's sticking true with his plan about not rushing for free agents just because they landed Connor Bedard, because you still have to look so far ahead with this. And the Blackhawks are a great example of this kind of recently, winning 3 Stanley Cups during a 6-year span, they saw how quickly it went downhill. So as high as you can be on top of the mountain, there still takes a lot to maintain that status and that level and that competitive nature. And Kyle Davidson was on the staff when this was all going on. So I think he's got a great position to try and build something that has sustainable success and keep it sustainable, to keep the draft picks coming, to keep the development coming, to not get too complicated with long-term deals. And I know this is kind of a long-winded answer and going into a couple of your other topics, but he has been on the ground for so much from the Blackhawks' success and past it. I think he's got a great example of what to do and what not to do. And now he's the one in charge making those decisions.
And I was actually going to bring up that patient approach next, because despite getting Connor Bedard, kind of the expectations for the Blackhawks and what they're going to do next as they go forward in this rebuild is that the process hasn't necessarily excelled all that much. Getting Connor Bedard is awesome, right? But we've heard Kyle Davidson, as you referenced, want to kind of stick to his plan. And why would he deviate from that? Look at what it's gotten him so far. I mean, the Blackhawks in just a year and a half's time has accumulated, with getting Connor Bedard, arguably the greatest prospect pool in the NHL as of right now. And they have a slew of draft picks moving forward. I mean, it completely makes sense that he wants to stick to what he's been doing because it's worked out well so far. So I guess just a further touch on Davidson, how have you thought this patient approach has been? Because it seems like, well, at the time, I've liked most of his moves. Some of them at the time, maybe we didn't understand them per se, but everything has kind of worked out incredibly well for him now. So what do you think about this patient approach going into next season and what it means for the Chicago Blackhawks? Like, what would you say your expectations are for this team, considering Davidson kind of still wants to play it patient moving forward despite getting Bedard?
It's a small sample size with everything that he's done, but I do feel like he's hit on almost everything. There can be criticism of the Alex DeBrincat trade and kind of going against what he was saying along the lines of, we're not going to make a move just to make a move. And then it kind of seemed to be the case when he did make that move. But I feel like he's gambled a little bit. He's stuck true to his word and his plan about slowly developing these guys. And everything is just under the same umbrella. So he's gambling a little bit. He's doing some risky moves, like moving on from Kirby Dach and Alex DeBrincat, because he knew that this is what it would have to take to completely move forward. And that's all a little bit of a gamble to try and win the lottery. But even if you don't win the lottery, you cushion yourself around that too with collecting more draft picks. I mean, 4 draft picks in the second round this upcoming year. You know you're going to get 2 in the first round of this upcoming season. And again, he was talking himself into, we're going to have a great draft pick. This is what he said after winning the lottery. He said, we're going to have a great draft pick, whether it is 3 or 5. That's going to be the top prospect the moment the Blackhawks select them. It doesn't matter who it is because it's that deep of a draft. And then it turns out that they get the top prize. So I think you've got to credit his boldness on all of this. And it is paying out. He caught a little bit of luck, but it's not like he was relying on the luck. You know, he was strategically going at it, and there's a lot to still be determined with a lot of these prospects. But you look at all the players that were on the Seattle Thunderbirds, you look at all the players that are growing and improving in Rockford, and now it's just setting up to a very comfortable state for these next couple of years where, are they going to be super competitive? Probably not. But we get to keep our eyes on Connor Bedard, Isaac Phillips, when Nolan Allen comes up, Kevin Korchinski. We get to keep our eyes on all these guys, see how they are developing. And it's a deep pool. It's a deep farm system. Those guys are going to be competing against their own teammates to try and get a good spot. So it's a really good time. And again, you got to credit the general manager for going full front on this plan, gambling a little bit, but not betting the house on just the lottery pick. So he kind of gets rewarded a little bit in that essence. And it's just a really fun time to be here on the ground floor of it.
Absolutely. It's been a couple of tough years to watch lately for the Chicago Blackhawks, but to see that light at the end of the tunnel start to grow a little bit and see some of these prospects, you referenced all the guys on the Seattle Thunderbirds and what they were able to do throughout the WHL playoff run that led to them winning the championship, and also throughout the Memorial Cup as well. It's a very exciting time to be thinking about the future of the Chicago Blackhawks. And the best part, Joe, is they got 2 first-round picks in 2024, 2 first-round picks in 2025. Got to be excited about the direction that Kyle Davidson has this team heading in. But as far as next season, kind of my ideal breakdown of what the Blackhawks should be trying to do, we reference they're not going to be competitive next year. Let's just get that out in the open. But I do think kind of my makeup for this team next year would be you do want to bring in some players that can help Bedard develop these next couple of years while you're still not necessarily going to be a contender. And I do think it's important to kind of bring in players inside the Blackhawks top 6 that can kind of play a similar game. I think they should really focus on that top 6 and what they could potentially do on the power play. And then that also sets them up to have a lot of these young defensemen come into the league next year. And then you also have a goalie combo of Peter Mrazek and Arvid Soderblom. To me, that's kind of the makeup of a fun team that can show some improvements, but also isn't still going to be that good. And that's why I personally really liked bringing back Andreas Athanasiou. He plays that fast-paced game, and we've heard the Blackhawks and Chief Scout Mike Donaghy talk about how much they're really keying in on players who can play with that speed and play at a fast pace, with the NHL only getting faster and faster and faster. I really liked bringing back Andreas Athanasiou. What did you think about that signing? Obviously, it just happened here a couple of days ago. And kind of how would you like to see Kyle Davidson round out this team for next year?
Definitely a fan of the Athanasiou re-signing, and I was in favor of that as last year was ending. Even though Andreas Athanasiou may not have had the best year with the Blackhawks in his first go-around, definitely improved as the season went along. I know it's different when guys like Domi and Kane leave and all of a sudden your responsibilities get jacked up a little bit more. But you're right, especially about Mike Donaghy and the quickness that the Hawks are looking for. Actually, I interviewed Mike earlier this year on Blackhawks Live, and he brought up the point that they're not just going after fast players, as in fast skaters, guys that have a lot of speed. They're looking for players that can play the game fast, quick decision-making, the right decision-making, playing under high intense, high pressure situations. That's what they're going after. And that's another thing that Kyle Davidson has just stayed consistent with. We talked about a few deals that, may not have made sense at the time. I mean, the Alex Nylander for Sam Lafferty swap, look at how much of an improvement in the Hawks system that was alone. Going after, a guy like Anders Bjork, maybe a low-level move and a low-level switch, but he comes into the situation, bigger responsibility with the Blackhawks, all of a sudden finds a different niche. And the other thing is hiring Luke Richardson to create a good environment in the clubhouse, I'm in baseball mode, in the locker room, in the dressing. Believe me, I've called our manager, the head coach, like 6 times. It's brutal. I have such difficult time swapping. But the hiring of Luke Richardson did so many things, because he went after a guy that could work with young players right now. He was looking for a head coach for the next couple of years for this young Hawks team right now, and hopefully the next successful Blackhawks team. It was. I said it on the air a lot. It was the most unique hire in the NHL, because it wasn't what the Flyers were looking for. It wasn't what, I guess, Bruce Boudreau was still with the Vancouver Canucks. But any head coaching opening in the NHL, it was nothing like the Blackhawks. It was, who is going to be our head coach for the next handful of years with our situation? And you heard Max Domi say it last offseason when the Blackhawks picked him up, that the moment he heard Luke Richardson was going to be the head coach, he wanted to go to Chicago. Why would Max Domi, who's got so much to give, want to go to a team that's rebuilding and, probably not going to be very competitive? But it turned out to be a great situation. Domi has expressed his interest in coming back to the Hawks. I'm sure plenty of Blackhawks fans would love to see Max Domi back once again, which I do think is a situation that would benefit this team this upcoming year. But it does so many things. And it also just that word, I think, can get around the league. And all of a sudden now you're a popular destination for NHL free agents when you're not winning. Now imagine when they are winning. And again, we've seen this Blackhawks team win 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years. What was part of their demise? All these long contracts that were worth too much money. Now Kyle Davidson, after having some experience with that, can be a little bit more careful with this and understanding that Chicago can be a high or promising destination for free agents, guys looking for a scene change, any of those types of things. So you got to use all that as your asset, use all of that to your benefit, and play with that, utilize that. And again, with just the way Kyle Davidson thinks and strategizes his setup for this year and next year and 2 years from now, makes me think that he understands that and he's got a good hold on that situation. And again, he's a guy that just looks for the next 5 years before jumping to a conclusion for this upcoming year, but he keeps it all into perspective. At least that's what I think.
Joe, I'm actually really glad that you brought up Luke Richardson, because I kind of think it gets lost in the craziness of what's going on with the Blackhawks right now, getting Connor Bedard, having a deep prospect pool, having a slew of draft picks in the 2023 NHL draft, $40 million in cap space. What a job Kyle Davidson has done since taking over as general manager. I think people forget how, I don't want to say successful, but how strong of a season he really had as a first-year head coach behind the bench. Look, the Blackhawks still had the 3rd worst record in the entire NHL. There's no arguing that, but there was a lot of things to be happy about. You mentioned the clubhouse and clubhouse. Now you got me saying it.
Yeah,
Joe.
my bad.
Look at what you're doing out here. But obviously he's a well-respected guy, a very good leader. And at the same time, it felt like he was getting the most out of his players, and the effort level was there for the Blackhawks for the most part all season long. And you look at the second half of the season, right? They just traded away Max Domi, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves doesn't return after the All-Star game. Jake McCabe and Sam Lafferty get sent to Toronto. There's a lot of, basically all of their good players that were providing impact to this team in the first half, they shipped out. And despite all that, in the second half of the year, here were the Blackhawks holding their own against some of the better teams in the NHL. I remember they beat Calgary in Calgary, which was a big loss for them that cost them a playoff opportunity. Yeah, same thing with the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. They go into Pittsburgh with their backs against the wall and they beat the Penguins. And also just some other games at the end of the year where the Hawks were going up against teams that had a lot more to play for and a lot deeper of a roster. The Blackhawks were able to hang and handle their own against those teams. So for me, I thought it was just an outstanding first year for Luke Richardson as the Blackhawks head coach. And I don't really think he's given any reason to think that he can't be the head coach for this team when everything, kind of opens back up and hopefully this team gets competitive in a few years. I know it's a short sample size, only 1 year, but you had to like what you saw out of Luke Richardson last year as head coach, right?
I said earlier how everything changed when the Blackhawks won the draft lottery. During the year, I was getting so many angry texters and tweeters and callers about the Blackhawks beating Calgary and beating the Pittsburgh Penguins and taking the Philadelphia Flyers to overtime. And you got to let the fans vent because it is justified. I understand where they're coming from. The one argument I kept falling back on is, if this is what Luke Richardson is capable of doing with a bad team, imagine what he's capable of doing with a good team. One tweeter literally said, Richardson's got these guys too inspired to play. Imagine that being a bad thing. He's got this team too inspired to play. I retweeted it. I put it on the pregame show. I'm like, this is supposed to be an insult, and it's probably the most praise you can give this head coach at this moment. I think he and Kyle Davidson are on the same page with a lot of things. They understand the long-term plan. There's no point to get too hard on a team for losing games to a really good team when the talent is just not there on paper. But he never goes into a game thinking that. He cuts it down to the small projects, the power play, the penalty kill, getting off to a good start. And if they don't get off to a good start, then, okay, how are we cleaning this up in the second period? I know they had a couple of losing streaks. I know they had a dud of a game at the TD Garden against Boston, but there were not many long stretches where there was two, maybe even, three terrible games in a row. They did a very good job of staying competitive, keeping the energy up. And that starts with the head coach. I also think it starts with the roster makeup. You get a lot of guys that are on short-term contracts, prove me deals, looking for a scene change. Again, that's strategy move made by Kyle Davidson. That's one way to keep a team competitive, even if you are rebuilding. And I get why fans were getting frustrated towards the end of the year, but then it ended up working out. And I'm not saying that, that's what every team needs to do, but you don't know because it is a lottery. And that's what Kyle Davidson said. I'm not going to tell Luke to start losing games. I'm not going to have him pull Alex Stalock because that's how you lose a dressing room. That's how everything falls together. Luke Richardson did the exact opposite, kept those guys motivated, having fun each and every day. And I go back to, if this is what he's able to do with a roster that you're rebuilding with, imagine what it could look like with a good roster, a solid roster, a competitive roster.